Hello and welcome to Audi ITV. Today we're looking at the RS6, at the core of the RS6 to be precise. And that is the new 5-litre V10 we've installed in it. Our expert is Audi Service Training's Wolfgang Mattis. Hello Wolfgang. So what are we discussing today?
Today we'll talk about changes to components in the vehicle's engine. We'll take a look at the oil circuit and dry-sump lubrication, and at the thermostat control, how exactly those systems function. And we'll also concentrate on how to go about changing the oil in the engine.
We'll also be making a second episode on this engine. What will that be about?
That will be about the cooling system, which is something particular in itself. It's not just a cooling system, it has some special features. We'll discuss the turbocharger control system itself. In connection with that, we'll also look at flow control for oil extraction from the turbochargers. That's also a thorny topic.
So all that will be on the 21st of May. I'm sure that will be very interesting. But today we'll be having a look at the oil circuit, as I said. Let's start with changes to engine components. Right, here we go. Changes to engine components. You might say there's a 5.2-litre in the S6 and S8. This is the mini version.
It's not exactly a mini version, it just has a bit less displacement. And there are a few differences with this engine. We've left out the balancer shaft, which made the 5.2 engine run so smoothly. A high-performance engine shouldn't have too many revolving components. They aren't necessary for this engine. The shaft would have been here in the inner V. It would have been run by the chain drive, but we left it out. We managed to reduce the displacement by changing the crankshaft's stroke. So there's a different crankshaft, not just with a different stroke, but one with what's called a common pin, or crank pin, which is shown here in red. It's end-to-end to ensure its stability, because at 580 horsepower, the piston has to withstand very high combustion pressure. The crankshaft has to be very durable. The common pin ensures sufficient strength, so both conrods run on the fixed crank pin. Unlike the 5.2 engine, which we will look at as well, we have what we call a split-pin crank pin. That means that both conrod mountings are shaped differently. And as we see here in the center of the component, there's a very small gusset, as it's called. So we have to avoid having a very heavy pressure here, because there is a high risk of damage.
Möglich, weil hier das Bruchpotenzial sehr hoch wäre dann in dem Moment.
The dry-sump lubrication is also a new feature.
It's an important part of the engine. Here are the components. Here's the intake module to replace the oil pan. The oil pump module, which contains the oil pump as well as the water pump. Other engine components include the exhaust manifold turbocharger module. As with the 2.0 turbo FSI engine and other engines, the manifold and turbocharger are one unit, attached with this clamping bar. This simplifies assembly work when fixing a turbocharger to the manifold. We can also see here that the turbocharger control is fitted snugly on the turbocharger.
The next program will cover that.
That's right.
We'll now take a look at the oil circuit. Today's topic, dry-sump lubrication, is associated with racing.
Yes, that's where it originates. It's a technology that ensures the oil pressure stays at a good level in all driving situations and conditions, such as with high centrifugal forces, i.e. in corners, Also, rapid acceleration alters the oil volume in the oil pan. The oil is pushed in different directions despite baffle plates and so on, which are not so reliable. And that's why we use dry-sump lubrication to ensure full oil pressure and keep the engine in good order.
This is nothing new for Audi, is it?
Right, we had it in the 12-cylinder, in the D2 and the A8. That's where we started to work with it. Then, of course, we advanced the system with the R8 sports car, and the RS6 was the next model to be fitted with dry-sump lubrication.
Let's take a closer look at how the oil circuit works. You have a computer animation for us.
Yes, we've got one that gives an overview of the entire oil flow. We can see an arrow coming out of the oil pump here. That represents the oil. You can see it going upwards inside the pipe through the oil cooler. Now the oil is entering the oil cooler. Through the oil cooler, which is an air cooler, it's cooled by the air streams. It goes through the thermostat housing straight into the oil reservoir. It's then extracted as cooled oil from the oil reservoir, and it can be used by the engine as pressurized oil in the pump. It goes from there to the engine. All lubrication points and heat exchangers inside the engine are supplied with oil. Then it goes on to the oil filter and canals, to the lubricating points, the crankshaft, camshaft, etc., etc.
You kept calling it the oil pump module, not just oil pump. Why was that?
It's called an oil pump module because the coolant pump is built in. I have the component here so I can show you. This part we have here is the oil pump, and this narrow part is the coolant pump, thermostat control, etc.
How is it driven?
I'll turn it towards the camera. You can clearly see here the input shaft into the oil pump module. This input shaft here is driven by chain drive D, which is an ancillary unit. It drives the pump module and then the water pump, so that the coolant pump is moving simultaneously.
We can't really look inside and see what the circuit looks like. Actually, we can look inside. We have a computer animation.
Yes, here we can see the oil pump gears and the whole unit. The arrow now entering the oil pump from the right is coming from the oil reservoir. Oil that has been extracted from the reservoir comes through these gear rows. Oil pressure is built up for the engine. The oil enters the oil circuit in the engine. You can see the arrow coming out. That's the oil pressure path. The second arrow is coming from the back part of the pump. That's the intake module or suction pump, which circulates the oil from the engine and bearings. You can see the small arrows from the holes with the black rings. All the oil from the engine, from the cylinder head, from the lubricating points, chain housing, etc., is extracted and fed into the oil reservoir.
While it's there, could you please explain what is extracted to where and from where?
This model should make it clear. This part here is the whole oil pump module. This is where the oil suction takes place. That's the narrow part. Here's an intermediate plate dividing the two parts. These two housings are separate. These holes that we can see here are where the oil is extracted from the oil extraction module on the engine. And each hole here is connected to the crankcase, crankshaft or cylinder head, etc. Each has its own hole. The oil is led through the pump, through this hole we can see back here when I turn the model around. Then it passes through this port to the oil reservoir via the thermostat. When it's in the oil reservoir, it's then extracted from the reservoir via this hole here. I'll turn it towards the camera so we can see the hole here clearly. This borehole serves the intake side.
In diesem breiteren Teil von der Pumpe.
Here is our pressure oil supply. In this broader part of the pump, oil pressure is built up here to supply the engine with pressurized oil.
If the oil pump module is so complex, then I'm sure the oil reservoir is particular too.
It does have its own particularities. It isn't just a container.
Shall we go over there? We have a diagram. We can see it there already. It's quite something.
That looks like an oil reservoir. We'll start from where it's pumped up into the reservoir. That's this entrance where you can see how a Y-tube divides the oil circuit into two paths. Both of them, here and here, are spun around in a rotating circuit. Here is the point where the oil is defoamed, degassed. There are blow-by gases, that is combustion residue, in this area. This is where the oil is spun, which degasses it. Then it drops down into the center through several baffle plates. You can see these panels in here with holes in them. The pump stirs the oil up a lot and it settles here in this part. The oil is defoamed here and then flows down into the lower area. Here's the suction pump collection point, which draws the oil here into the pressure zone. It carries it to the pump under high pressure to provide fresh, settled oil to the engine.
A display oil reservoir would be great. And we do have one, but it's still in the car. Let's have a look. It's quite easy to find, isn't it?
Yes, just look around the engine compartment.
Taking a look's not a bad idea, if you have the space.
Looking in the travelling direction on the right of the car, you can see the oil reservoir up here. At the very top, of course, you can only see the crankcase breather for primary oil separation from the blow-by gases. And here we can see the shiny oil dipstick with the large oil can on it. It's difficult to remove since it has to be very tight. The oil dipstick has this symbol on top and shows the oil level inside the tank.
So don't waste time looking for something yellow, orange or red.
There isn't the usual red or orange that you can pull to check the oil level. This is a proper dipstick to check the oil level in the reservoir.
What are the necessary precautions for replacing a broken oil pump?
The fitting itself is relatively uncomplicated, but the whole oil pump module has to be replaced. That's because the coolant pump is actually integrated in the module and has to be replaced at the same time. The coolant thermostat is the only thing you can replace separately. That can be replaced independently, but not the coolant pump.
Okay.
You've brought along another component for us. We should take a look at it. It's just over there. The intake module. It looks different to how I imagined. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, this is the intake module. You're quite right. In other engines, the intake module often functions as an oil pan. But we don't have enough space, so we have an intake module. The oil is extracted directly from the oil pump and is stored here. Here you can see where the crank webs rotate along here. There are 5 of them in all. It's a 10-cylinder engine with 2 conrods per crank web. If you take a closer look at the edges, then you'll see that it's like a carpenter's plane. It's offset from the other section. It's not just curved, it's also offset and sharp at the edges. It's also called the baffle plate. It takes in the jets of oil that are spun around and exit the crankshaft. And it then transports them to the intake module. And you can see very nicely here on the front that there are a lot of boreholes here. These match up with the oil pump. Each crank web, each oil return line from the cylinder head and so on has its own port. So the oil pump can extract all the engine oil on its own. And that's it, basically.
Those were the components. Now we just need to look at the thermostat control. We'll explain how it works now.
Let's take a look.
The burning question, how hot?
Thermostat control starts at an oil temperature of 100 degrees Celsius. The thermostat is activated when the temperature reaches 100 degrees Celsius. It opens an additional port. This then provides access to the oil cooler.
We have a computer animation of that.
It's hard to see the actual component.
It's hard to explain without pictures.
Firstly, we can see the cold engine, or an engine not yet hot from running. Here's the oil circuit. The oil is led to the thermostat housing and then fed straight to the oil reservoir. It's extracted from the oil reservoir by the pressure pump. Then it flows to the engine. It's not a long circuit. There's no cooling involved here. The engine is brought to operating temperature. There's full lubrication.
Und die Schmierung ist optimal. Jetzt haben wir mal eine Vergrößerung.
Now we have a larger view of the thermostat. We can also see inside. You can see the spring and the expanding element.
Das sich jetzt noch im
The element is in the process of directing the oil to the oil reservoir in the engine, which is still not at operating temperature. When the engine has reached an oil temperature of 100 degrees, the expanding element will open against the force of the spring by the expansion of the wax filling inside, and the annular channel is open. The oil can no longer flow into the oil reservoir. It flows through the oil cooler. After flowing through the oil cooler, it enters the middle line via the thermostat housing and flows into the oil reservoir. That means there is now cooled engine oil in the oil reservoir.
Here's an overview of it all.
You can see the oil cooler in this larger animation. It flows through the annular channel in the thermostat housing and into the oil cooler. Then it is cooled down by the airstreams.
Heruntergekühlt. Und am Ende vom Kühler.
And then it goes back from the cooler to the thermostat housing. Here we have a good view of the oil's path. Inside the thermostat housing, it's diverted to the oil reservoir. It fills up again. The oil is cooled and ready to be used in the engine again.
Zur Verfügung gestellt werden.
Oil circuit complete, oil circuit explained. And this is the point where I get to ask you a question. It'll be no problem if you've been paying attention. It's a multiple choice question with a choice of 4 answers. Only one is right, so listen closely and try to find the right answer. How does the thermostat adjust itself in order to open the annular channel? Again, how does the thermostat adjust itself in order to open the annular channel? Is it caused by oil pressure, or by spring force, or by heating the expanding element? Or are none of these answers correct?
Oder stimmt keine dieser 3 Antworten?
Have a think about it, and we'll be back in a moment.
Wir sind gleich wieder da. So, die Frage lautete, wie...
The question was, how does the thermostat adjust itself in order to open the annular channel, allowing oil to flow to the cooler? Let's start with the last answer. None of the answers are right.
Die ist auch nicht richtig.
That's not right.
82,8%.
82.8% said by warming the expanding element. 82% can't be wrong.
Yes, that is right. The expanding element contains a wax filler. The wax expands when heated. This then forces a plunger out of the element and against the thermostat housing. The spring force displaces the thermostat.
So the 6.4% who said by spring force?
That's also wrong. The spring has one function. When the engine cools and temperature sinks, the spring pushes the thermostat back to idle position to open the other, shorter oil circuit again.
6.1% of viewers said by oil pressure.
Oil pressure is not a factor here. We have a flow rate that exerts a minimal pressure. It would not be enough pressure to adjust the thermostat.
And 5.1% shows none of the answers are correct.
I'd love to know what their answer would have been.
Magic. That's the only explanation. We've covered oil cooling. I presume if the system itself is so complicated, then changing oil won't be simple either. We don't have lifetime.
Lifetime haben wir nicht.
We have a service interval extension, a long life service. That's 30,000 kilometres and 2 years, as is the norm with all Audis. We also offer that in this case. Of course, you can also opt for the normal oil change after 15,000 kilometres or 1 year. And of course, you can opt for a different sort of oil. But essentially, we have long life service.
Okay.
If an RS6 dries up onto the forecourt and I want to carry out an oil change, then there are several possible scenarios, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Let's go over to the diagram and take a look.
That looks easy enough. Take 2 screws out and you're done.
I took a photo of the undercarriage. This is from the first set of vehicles that we sent off the production line, or are sending off now. They were installed with 2 oil drain screws, one at the lowest point. That's the thermostat housing here. That's what it looks like. And here we have a big screw, that's where oil is drained. We have a second oil drain screw up here. This is the pipe that goes from the oil reservoir towards the pump. We have the extra one here because a great deal of oil can be drained from the reservoir. So there we have the 2 oil drain screws installed.
How much comes out of each screw?
It's hard to say exactly. In total, there's a refill volume of roughly 6.7 litres of oil. That's how much you have to refill once you've drained it to reach a normal oil level.
What's the total oil volume?
In the entire circuit, if the engine is freshly filled up, there'll be roughly 11.2 litres of oil pumped into the engine.
So 5 litres remain.
They stay in the circuit. With dry-sump lubrication, it's always the case that not all the oil comes out. The engine doesn't have its own drain screws or oil pan to gather oil, so it has to be extracted mechanically. So there are regulations on how the oil has to be changed. I'll say more about that later.
These are the cars that have been delivered to market.
Yes, up to stock number 386 were delivered with this system. And from stock number 386, roughly week 12 or 13, there are twice as many oil drain screws. This diagram shows the oil drain screws on the thermostat housing. As with the last model. Here on the line from the oil reservoir to the fresh oil supply, there's one there too. And now there's one in front of the oil reservoir and one after it. 2 more oil drain screws. So the oil cooler can also be drained properly.
Do you have to use all 4?
You have to open them all. You have to let oil out of all of them.
It gets better, right? You're adding another one, aren't you? Starting when?
From week 22. There will be a new manufacturing stage. Apart from the 4 oil drain screws we just looked at, the engine's chain housing is also going to get an oil drain screw at its lowest point, here. A lot of oil also gathers at the bottom of the chain housing and will then be able to drain it. If you open all 5 of the screws, then it should be possible to refill around 8.3 litres of oil to take us back to normal oil level. Essentially, the procedure is in fact easier now. The engine is run up to operating temperature, or run briefly at relatively high RPMs. It's all in the repair manual. The engine must be at operating temperature, that is about 100 degrees oil temperature. Then the oil is drained.
It doesn't matter how many screws.
No matter how many screws there are, 5 litres are added. Then you should let the engine run in neutral for around 30 seconds. This fills all the ports with oil, including the turbocharger. Don't press the accelerator. You'll damage the turbocharger if you run it while the ports are empty. Turn the engine off after the 30 seconds and add another 1.5 litres of oil.
Do I have to wait before doing that?
No, add it after letting it idle in neutral for 30 seconds. Then start the engine and bring it to operating temperature. When you have a temperature between 100 and 110 degrees Celsius on the instrument cluster, you can turn the engine off. Let it rest for about 2 minutes so that the oil can settle. Then you can check the oil levels. You have to adjust the oil levels within 10 minutes, as was the case with the Audi R8. You pull out the oil dipstick so you can see whether you need to refill again. You should replace oil from 2 screws at least. There will be more oil to refill with 4 or 5 screws to get it back to the necessary oil levels.
I've heard you should check oil levels when the engine is running.
Some manufacturers do it like that. With dry-sump lubrication, the oil reservoir is in a stable state. There are no big fluctuations in oil levels. That is, unless you don't maintain the temperature level. The oil volume increases as the engine temperature increases. We've established that roughly 100 degrees is the optimal temperature for adjusting the oil levels properly.
So stick closely to the guidelines.
It's very similar to what we did with the R8. Very little has changed in the procedures here. If you've worked with the R8, you'll have no problems. It's only the drain screws. They can be difficult. You really have to open all of them.
You've been warned. Now it's time for your questions. If you've any questions about the oil circuit or changing the oil in the new RS6 engine, then please send us a telegram. We'll be back in a moment to answer your questions. Matthias Schmaler asks, do you have to remove the engine to replace the oil pump module?
No, the engine can stay in the car for the replacement. You can remove the oil pump module from underneath. You just have to remove a few lines and axle components, but the engine can certainly stay in. I have seen one being removed. I wanted to see it for myself. Jörg
Kröning asks, what happens to the oil that remains when draining? There is still 5.5 to 6 litres.
Compared to an engine with an oil pan, dry-sump lubrication causes less wear on the engine. And it's possible for us then to mix this oil with the new oil without any problems.
Why?
Because it contains a lot of oil compared to normal oil pans, which normally only have 6 litres. Here we have over 11 litres with reserves included, so it's not an issue with dry-sump lubrication.
Thorsten Russ is trying to figure out what is where in the RS6. He asks, are all the oil drain screws all the same size?
The ones on the lines are all the same size. The one in the thermostat is bigger and has a different thread, a different diameter. Basically, we have 4 that are the same and 1 that is different if it's at the final stage.
It would be good if you just had to use the one spanner for them all. But maybe you just have to look for the numbers.
Yes, but as far as I've seen, they all look the same on the pipes. Only the one on the thermostat housing has a different shape, as we saw on screen. You don't have to change screws, only the sealing rings.
Das war nämlich auch gleich die nächste.
That was the next question. From Frank Schimmelfennig, he asks, do you have to replace the screws?
The oil drain screws can be used again unless the thread or the Allen key or spanner has caused any damage. Just replace the sealing rings, not the screws.
Michael Jentsch fragt,
Next question's a good one. Do all the drain screws have to be opened at the same time?
I don't know how they would manage that. But if you have a large oil drain pan, then it's good to do them one after the other. And I'd open the one that is highest up on the pipes to start with. I'd open the one on the thermostat housing, the lowest one, last. Then I'd let them all drain out at the same time. There is a prescribed amount of time the oil should be allowed to drain for. As far as I can remember, it's about 10 minutes.
Also wie ich jetzt im Hinterkopf habe, sind es ungefähr 10 Minuten, dann nur das Öl abtropfen muss.
ja, das macht, glaube ich, auch Sinn.
That makes sense to get as much new oil in as possible.
Natürlich, dass der Motor auch Betriebstemperatur.
The engine should be at operational temperature because when the thermostat opens, the oil cooler will also be emptied.
Da verbrenne ich mir aber nicht.
But I won't get burnt, will I?
Es ist sehr warm.
Of course, the oil is very warm, but you don't have to hold on to the screw all the time. You open it with a spanner. You hardly have any contact with it. Our men out there are very clued up. I'm sure they would know better than to touch it.
Öl in Berührung kommt.
So ist es. Apropos gewiefte Jungs.
On the subject of clued up men, and women of course, Thorsten Russ asks, can the oil be extracted? Really, I'd say you'd have to.
Ich möchte einen Schritt weitergehen und sagen, man muss.
Ja, aber die Ölmenge selbst
Yes, but you can't extract all of it. You'd get nowhere.
muss noch absaugen, das haben wir
We didn't talk about extracting the oil. If you've opened up all of the oil drain screws, you have to empty the oil reservoir with an oil extraction unit.
leer saugen.
Den Ölbehälter.
The oil reservoir.
Das heißt, ich muss über den
Right, you have to extract the oil with the tube from the deepest part of the oil reservoir in order to remove all the remaining oil. We can see how that works again with the oil reservoir diagram.
in diesem Ölbehälter nochmal.
Da haben wir eine Grafik zu.
Ah yes, we've got a diagram.
Ja,
Und
Yes, we do. Here we can see the extraction point where the oil is extracted. That's an area of only around 3 centimeters. The oil stays in the oil reservoir underneath. That has to be extracted.
was
absaugen.
denkst du, wie viel kriege ich da noch raus?
How much will come out?
There's about a litre left in there to extract.
Jetzt waren in der ersten Frage
In the first round of questions, there were people who had worked on the R8. They asked, why doesn't the reservoir have a drain screw?
Ölbehälter wie beim R8 halt.
Ja, beim R8 hat man den
In the R8, we were able to position the oil reservoir so it was very low down and you could get to it from underneath. You could get to the oil drain screw and empty it.
die Ölablassschraube öffnen von dem Ölbehälter und entleeren. Hier ist
The oil reservoir in this car is installed in an area of the engine where it can't be accessed from below.
gar nicht hinkommen.
Hätte er denn eine?
If there was a drain screw, would you be able to get to it?
Würde ich hinkommen?
If it were possible to get to, we'd have put one in. The longitudinal member is in the way. You can't even see the oil reservoir from below. That's why you have to extract it. It's a safer method. We only use extraction in the reservoir. You can't get to the engine.
Oder selber komme ich nicht ran zum Absaugen.
Damit haben wir eigentlich auch schon die beiden anderen.
That answers 2 other popular questions. How is oil drained from the oil reservoir? It's extracted. Why is it extracted? We want to replace as much as possible.
Weil wir halt möglichst viel erneuern wollen. Ne?
Ja, weil aber nicht, auch nicht aus dem Ölbehälter.
And not all the oil drains from it. That's in the air gap in the inner tube where the oil pump extracts the fresh oil. There's a 3 centimeter space there, and that's where it rests.
Und da bleibt das Öl drin stehen.
Okay. Das war
Okay, that was the last question for today. Thanks for your questions. Wolfgang, thanks for your answers.
Worten.
I hope I was of use to the viewers.
Es gab noch eine schöne Frage in der ersten Runde.
There was one good question in the first round. It was wonderful. We didn't answer it in the end. Where is the oil filter?
Ist der Ölfilter?
Richtig, das war noch eine gute
That's right, it was a good question. We saw it in the computer animation where the arrow went through the oil filter module before going to the bearings.
Lagerstellen gegangen ist. Aber wir
But we can take a look inside the car so the viewers out there can see that the filter is very accessible.
zugänglich ist.
Wollen wir es machen?
Come on, let's go over to the car.
Auto, wir zeigen mal, wenn wir schon über
If we're going to talk about oil, we have to show the oil filter. That's the most basic part. I'll just come through.
durch.
Und ich nehme jetzt einfach mal
I'll just take this cover off here. We can see the oil filter cover back here, where the cartridge is. You should be able to see it now. I'll put my pen in here, back here. You just have to push the tube a bit to the side. And then we can get to the oil filter housing. You can unscrew the lid. Here you could also replace the oil filter cartridge.
Great, we've answered that too.
Can the camera come closer?
Can we see it again? In between all those pipes there. Let's make it simpler. Underneath the cover. You will definitely find the oil filter underneath the cover. Great, we've solved that. There must be some unanswered questions. Take a look at Audi ITV Net and you'll find a lot of answers there. You can also evaluate this program in an online questionnaire under quality feedback. It's easy and helps us out. There are still more questions and answers. We'll be looking at this engine again on the 21st of May. The RS6 will be back. Wolfgang Mattes will be back. And once again, what will we be discussing?
We'll look at the cooling system. That's a system with 5 coolers installed. That's one of the more complicated issues. But it's not so hard once you understand it. We'll look at turbocharger control, how the turbochargers are controlled, and what happens with turbocharger oil extraction. That's the rear part of the oil pump module. Then there's also flow control. We'll go into detail on that because mistakes can occur.
Okay.
Wolfgang, thank you very much. Thanks for watching. See you next time on the 21st of May. See you then. Bye.
Bye.